Time now for the news review of this bulletin. Iraq has summoned the U.S. chargé d'affaires after reports that Israel carried out several strikes against pro-government Popular Mobilization Forces in recent weeks. Foreign Minister Mohammed Ali al-Hakim told Brian McFeeters that Iraq should not turn into a battleground for settling disputes. He called on the U.S. to stay committed to their strategic cooperation agreement. On Friday, the New York Times quoted two senior American officials as saying that Israel carried out multiple strikes on munition storehouses in Iraq in recent days. The New York Times also said a senior Middle Eastern intelligence official revealed that Israel bombed the PMU base north of Baghdad on July 29th. The report comes after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hinted at possible Israeli involvement in recent attacks against the PMU forces in Iraq.
ואם אנחנו נסתכל על זה במעבר חד, כן, בפרספקטיבה יותר כוללת, האם אנחנו פועלים בכל המרחב, כולל עיראק למשל, כפי שמדווחים בכלי תקשורת הערביים?
We do not give immunity. I don't give immunity to Iran anywhere. Iran is a country, a power which has declared its desire to annihilate us. It is trying to establish bases against us everywhere, in Iran itself, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. We are operating not just if we need it, we are operating in many areas against a state that wants to annihilate us.
Netanyahu accused Iraq's volunteer forces of being a proxy for Iran. A series of blasts in the past few weeks have hit weapon depots and bases belonging to the PMF in Iraq. On Wednesday, Popular Mobilization Forces in a statement held Washington and Tel Aviv responsible for the explosions. The forces had a key role in fighting the Daesh terror group in Iraq. Iran says its presence in Iraq and Syria is limited to advisory missions at the request of the governments. Saad al-Mutalabi is from the State of the Law Coalition, who joins us from Iraq's capital, Baghdad. We also have Jason Unruhe, a political commentator and analyst, who joins us from Ontario. Gentlemen, welcome. Saad al-Mutalabi, so how does that make you feel?
Thank you very much.
How does that make you feel, you along with your fellow lawmakers and in general people who are officials, when you hear about the fact that Israel has struck these positions and of course the U.S. involvement in this whole affair?
To start with, I think there is a general understanding now here in Baghdad and Iraq on a political level and on a public level that there is a requirement for revisiting the American-Iraqi strategic agreement. Is there any need for this agreement, for this strategic agreement, or is it not? Since the Americans have promised within the agreement, and they have a number of duties towards Iraq, partly political, partly economical, and so and so. And from the security point of view, we see that the Americans have not lived to the agreement. And if the space of Iraq is partially under the control of the Americans, or at least in cooperation with the Iraqi side, we don't see any active participation from the United States in providing vital information for who is attacking the storages and who is having this free hand in moving around the Iraqi space. Therefore, I think many in Iraq here understand and believe that we need to revisit this agreement and renegotiate with the United States and maybe revoke this agreement.
Okay, well, let's look at, Jason Unruhe, the military engagements that Israel has in the region. We could look at, of course, the multiple times that it has bombed the Gaza Strip, but outside of that, we're looking at what? Syria? Now we're looking at Iraq, and on Wednesday, reports have surfaced that Israel is thinking about striking Yemen, and of course, minus the Gaza Strip. This is for Jason Unruhe. Minus the Gaza Strip, it says that these are either Iranian-linked or Iranian-backed, using the common country Iran that it's targeting. Doesn't that lead to instability in the region, first of all, Jason Unruhe?
Well, indiscriminate bombing of any region would lead it to that kind of instability. I mean, this is exactly what Israel wants, in my opinion. As many countries are now beginning to stand up to the axis of the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, there now needs to be a pushback against it by Israel in order to sow that kind of discord. I think that what we're seeing here is a deliberate attempt by Israel on behalf of the United States, but working together in order to intimidate the government of Iraq into ceasing any cooperation with Iran. I think that that's what really this is about. It's about destabilizing the region in order to forward U.S., Israeli, Saudi interests. As many of these countries, Syria, Iraq, Iran, part of Yemen get together and they begin a cooperation, a pushback against the imperialism that's being carried out in the region that is, of course, counter to their interests, and thus it becomes necessary to attack these countries in order to step up the pressure against it. I mean, very clearly that when these countries get together and they cooperate, good things can happen, and this is not something that Israel wants to happen. Now, essentially, they're getting a free hand from the United States to go out and sow this kind of terror across the region. And of course, as usual, the UN is sitting on its hands, not chastising or even stopping Israel from what it's doing, because, of course, the UN is largely controlled by the United States, not completely controlled, but very largely, and has not only a veto power, but a very large military threat against anyone who would dare do anything. As we saw with the previous vote some time ago to recognize Palestine, the United States responded by cutting funding to the UN. So I think that this is part of a larger effort to destabilize the region. It's very deliberate on the part of the United States and Israel. It's just that in these particular situations, it's Israel that's doing the physical work of causing the destabilization.
You alluded to the fact, Said al-Mutalabi, that it's not directly proven that the U.S. is engaged in this. However, there are indications from various publications that say that they've reached the conclusion that it was through U.S. approval and through even U.S. directives that Israel carried out these attacks. Furthermore, you also seem to indicate that the Iraqi airspace is not well informed about who's flying over it or not. Is that the case?
Well, this is apparently the truth is because it seems that we don't have a control over our airspace, or we don't know who controls our airspace, or who is coming and going. So eventually, in the end, it calls for the same thing. We have no control over our airspace. And if the investigations proven that there was an external attack on Iraq, either Americans or Israeli or whatever, I think the Iraqi nation should have a reply to this matter. Otherwise, the Israelis will have, or who else will have, a free hand on attacking whatever targets Iraqi or otherwise on Iraqi soil. And that is completely unacceptable. All political parties understand the importance and the negativity of such actions. So whatever reaction, Iraq must provide reasonable, sensible, equal amount of reaction to such attacks, either in the United Nations or otherwise, and not left this matter vaguely with simple condemnation, because eventually Israel will have a freer hand, and it seems that the Americans are not interested in applying for the or adhering to the agreement that they have with Iraq.
Before I let you go, Said al-Mutalabi, what's going to happen if we see either more attacks and then an increase in attacks to how it started with Syria in Iraq?
Well, that is a very serious question, and requires a serious reply. I don't see the Iraqi government at present, I don't see the Iraqi Prime Minister is ready to issue any orders that will equal that action with an equal reaction, or will take steps affect the critical relationship that we have now with the United States. We must say, I mean, the relation now is at mostly very critical and very unbalanced. And I don't think the Iraqi government at present is ready to rock the boat with this unstable relationship with the United States.
Jason Unruhe, finally to you, quickly, if you can answer this. You know, this comes, the significance of the timing of this by Israel also puts a question mark. We know that the PMU forces in Iraq, well, they fought these Daesh terrorists. They're the ones that were responsible for, in a sense, saving Iraq from these terrorists. And now Israel is attacking the positions that they are at. Don't you think that's kind of suspicious in terms of why they've taken this decision at this point?
No, it's more than suspicious in my view. As we have seen in the past, Daesh commanders have gone to Israel for medical treatment from Syria once they had become injured. I don't think that this is necessarily really all that much suspicious. I think this is very overt and right out there that you would attack the forces that are trying to beat down Daesh, the ones that were initially prescribed by the United States and Israel, in my opinion, to carry out the destabilization of the Middle East to begin with.
Thank you for that, Jason Unruhe, political commentator and analyst. Said Al-Mutalabi, thank you, from the State of the Law Coalition from Baghdad. And that does it for our news review.